Because as when you have a set formula for that, as systems change in their relative wealth, you end up with more and more large systems, is what's been happening, become eligible for equalization funding, which meant that some of these really large systems in the Atlanta area were suddenly getting equalization that never had gotten equalization funding. And the cost to fully fund equalization was going through the roof. It was up around 800.
If it was fully funded under the old formula, it would be 800 and 440.
So it was held to that lower funding level. It wasn't reduced, it just was locked there. And when you looked at it, if we didn't make any change, then those really large systems who were relatively high on the wealth per student thing, but still eligible for the funding, they were going to eat up so much of it that you would have just gone way better than the systems that were really poor. And that's another way to say it. And so we changed the way it was done from the 75th percentile to the state average. And that's what created some of that loss for you.
I know that the wealth indicator in the state, I've seen that survey, but and I'm assuming that it could be because of the large plantation property owners that we have here in the county. But we're ranked above Lowndes County over in Valdosta, and that just...
And it comes down, and that's the biggest, and I talk to a lot of districts that ask that same question. They look at wealth, and we all associate wealth with income. And it's wealth with property, it's property wealth compared to the number of students. And if you get some districts that have a real small student population, and there's some South Florida districts that are less than 1,000, you drive through and there's only a Dollar General or something there. You say, well, they're not wealthy, but it's property value per student because that's what determines wealth, not the income level. So you can have 86% free and reduced, but your property values are what determine the wealth ranking. So that's why it's hard for people to understand. You get these large districts that have a huge student population. You look at them and say, this is a wealthy district, but the students that prefer the dollars per student, the property value per student, the digest per student, that makes them a poor district. So it's hard to see why it has to do with number of students and property value, not income at all. It has been discussed, I can't say, but we've looked at it. I know I've been in discussions as how can we, at some point, sometime down the road, high income levels to that. And so it is a discussion, but right now, when you look at equalization, it's strictly a property value because that's where you get your taxes from. If you have more property, the thought process is you get local taxes on it. So that's why.
It just seems strange. It's hard to swallow when larger systems in what we would call larger areas, certainly not Metro Atlanta, but larger areas down in South Georgia, either stay relatively same with equalization or gained in some cases. And I think the city of Valdosta actually gained money, and we lost. It's just, I think the formula may be dead on, but it's just hard to understand how that could be. If any of you guys have questions now, please jump in.
Well, hanging on to what Trey was saying, we're like, how does industries figure into any of this? Because we have no industry. We have, I mean, what we've had is closed, so we may have land.
It's the total value of the tax digest divided by the number of students. That's what determines per student wealth. So if you've got a lot of industry in a county, then that industry adds to your wealth per student. If you've got a lot of expensive land, for instance, in
the Forest Land Protection Act, we have.
Havisham, some of those counties up in the northeast, where mountain land, where they've got all these people coming from Florida building huge homes. They have almost no industry there, but the land values are so high on the digest that their wealth per student is very high.
Basically, and I think Valdosta has, what, 3 times the students? If I'm looking at-
Oh, yeah, it's a large shift.
So they have to have, unless their property value is not 3 times your property value. So that's, so they end up being a poorer district because they have less property per student. So it comes down to students and property value. That's the only 2 things, that's the 2 key elements of that calculation. So the more students you have, the less opportunity you have for your local taxes to contribute to that student because they still have the property. So, I know it's crazy, and I've had this discussion with numerous finance directors, that that's the same question, so that's what determines wealth.
And that's one of the, I'm sure that, I mean, that, one of the subcommittees has looked at equalization, and actually, the changes that were made came out of that QB Funding Review Commission, the subcommittee, and I was not on that subcommittee, I think it was. But the recommendations from that subcommittee are the changes that were made in equalization this time. And the desire was to help those systems that are at the very bottom of the wealth per student. And those who are on the higher end of it are the ones who were funding it.
I know, that makes some sense.
Just frustrating.
Well, we
When
also saw
Gwinnett
like
County,
Gwinnett, yeah.
Gwinnett County, which you think of as being a wealthy county, they were going to get like $30 million.
Almost, and growing, because they have so many students and they're still continuing to grow, but their property values are going down. So they qualified for equalization, which set all of us kind of into an alarm because they will suck up the whole pie. They will eventually consume bigger and bigger portions of it. And by making this adjustment, now we still get to trickle it down. You did lose some of the smaller ones gained some more, and still are in the game for some funding. It doesn't soothe your wound at all, but on the big picture, it kind of mitigated some of that gobbling up by the really huge systems and tried to keep some of the integrity for what this was supposed to do.
They didn't particularly like equalization either. They weren't real happy with that change.
Well, I think that's part of the problem on the statewide level where funding is down, but yet student enrollment, FTE, since I think 02 is up some 30,000 students, and our funding hasn't risen a lot. If we were still,
All we paid is the growth.
if we were still at the same number of students we had 10 years ago, then we wouldn't be in near the financial shape that we're in now. I think that's a lot of where the problem is.
We kind of give ourselves no benefit, but saying, we're funding the growth, but when you have the bottom line austerity and it's starting to float, then,
We give it to this end and take it back to this one.
kind of, well, yes, it's not kind of, it is. But that equalization seems to be the best way for the majority of those who would have completely lost out. The pot just seems finite. How do you respread the Nutella on the bread? I don't know how you want to say it. But, one piece of bread is this much, and how do you divide that up and make it as equitable as possible to as many systems as possible?
This is the third or fourth change that's been made to equalization. When it was first created, it was equalizing 3 meals to the 90th percentile. You got the first 3 meals over your fat on the bottom. First thing you went to 75th percentile, and everything over 5 meals. So we're not there yet.
We may not ever be done with it.
No,
I'm not sure.
You got a finite amount of resources. And yes, he's right, we need to consider how we increase the revenue stream. But even increasing it, there's still going to be a finite amount. And the needs are always going to be greater than what that is. I dealt with that as a superintendent. When the question, the 20 schools in my system came in, it always added up to more than the revenue that I could produce locally and from the state. I had to make conscious decisions about this school's going to get this school's not going to get this. we're gonna reduce staff at the central office, we're gonna, you did what you had to do to make the money go as far as it could go. We ended up having to do the same thing. I didn't get out of that when I went into the legislature. I ended up doing the same thing. I want to go someplace where there's more money than there is needs. It makes for a happier life.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, I mean, I understand exactly what you're going through. I just don't have the answer to it. She does.
Anybody else? And there we go.
I will tell you too, Trey, I called the Department of Revenue, and there has, the way that this Forest Land Protection Act works is that the OPB allots money to the Department of Revenue to pay the systems. And they pay the system based on the receivership of, or the receivership of when the tax commissioner requests the money on behalf of the system. And so, I don't know where Brooks County is on the list, but there has been the first allotment has been distributed from OPB to the Department of Revenue, but at this point, they're awaiting the budget office and the DOR to release the money.
So, in other words, I need to make sure our tax commissioner has got our name in line.
You do.
Yeah, the sooner the better. We best guesstimate some of that stuff. And,
For a system our size, we have a large amount, FLPA amount, near $500,000. That's a good little chunk of our annual tax revenue.
What is your 1 mil equals what?
Around 462,000, I believe.
we try to keep that fund exactly where we think it needs to be based on our best guesstimate. It's always good to be able to find a line here.
You know, one of the things I've learned in the legislature is that it's important for people in your position, and I held your position at one point, to work very closely with their local tax assessors, tax commissioners, because if they make a mistake, it doesn't hurt them. It hurts
Absolutely
y'all.
right.
And we've seen some really significant mistakes made. Where a system is shorted $1 million or $2 million because some mistake was made in the digest. So if I could encourage somebody to do something, that we work together.
We work together real well.
That's good.
I was not aware that she had actually requested. I thought it went in along with Mr. Attorney and her tax dollars.
What do you see other systems doing, like with the funding, and we're pretty much been funding the debt here, we don't have answers for funding and it's not there. But what do you see other systems doing to still the quality of education to the students with fewer people? I mean, are we going back to the basics, or is there something in the educational system that would maybe streamline and get us back to basics and take some of the burden of things that we are to do with less people?
There's a lot of variance from system to system. I mean, there are systems in the state that have dropped back to 160 days. And they've extended the time in the day so that it comes out. There are systems that have increased class sizes up to as high as they can